The cub was already dying when I found the footage. My name is Lucas Ferreira, and that night I was alone at the research station, 40 kilometers from the nearest road, watching camera feeds from deep inside the Amazon reserve. What I saw in the next 3 hours made me question everything I thought I knew about predators and about love. I had been tracking her for 8 months. We called her N7, the 7th melanistic jaguar recorded in our study area, a Black Panther, though that name belongs more to legend than to science. What she really was a jaguar whose coat carried more darkness than light. You'd walk past her in the forest and never know she was there. That was the thing about N7. She was invisible until she decided not to be. She was supposed to be solitary. That's what our data said. That's what every textbook said. Jaguars don't form family bonds the way lions do. The male vanishes after mating. The female raises her young alone, hidden, silent. We had no idea she had cubs until a camera trap caught her dragging a peccary carcass into a hollow at the base of a fig tree 6 weeks before that night. 2 cubs, both dark, the melanistic gene running strong through her line. I'd spent weeks watching her teach them through the cameras, the way she'd freeze mid-stride to make them freeze too, the way she'd cuff them lightly when they moved wrong. She was a careful mother, controlled, deliberate. There was nothing impulsive about her. Nothing about what I had observed suggested what she would do before the sun came up. The alert came at 11:47 p.m. Camera 4, Sector 9, movement. Large movement. I pulled up the feed and immediately felt my stomach drop. The anaconda was enormous. I had seen big ones before. Researchers in our area had documented several over 4 meters, but this animal was in a different category entirely, easily 5 meters, possibly more. Her body as thick as my thigh and still glistening from the creek she had come up from. She had found one of the cubs outside the hollow in the exposed mud between the fig roots, and she had already begun to coil. The cub couldn't have been more than 4 months old, maybe 5 kilos, small enough that the snake's first loop covered him almost completely. I grabbed my radio and tried to reach my field partner, Silvio. No signal. A storm had taken out the relay tower 2 days earlier, and we hadn't been able to fix it. I was alone. My closest colleague was 4 hours away by boat, and even if I could reach anyone, what would I say? What could any of us do? There was nothing I could do except watch. The cub cried once, a short, sharp sound I had never heard a jaguar make, almost like a bird call, high and thin. Then the coil tightened, and there was no more sound, just the rain on the camera housing and the wet hiss of the jungle at night. N7 was 300 meters away when it happened. Camera 2 had caught her finishing a hunt, a paca, clean and quick, and the timestamp told me she was mid-feed when the cub cried. I don't know how she heard it over the rain and the distance and the constant noise of the forest, but something made her drop the carcass and move. She moved fast, not the careful, low stalk I had watched her use for months. Something different, something I had no word for in my field notes. Camera 4 picked her up at 11:53 p.m., 6 minutes after the first alert. She came out of the dark at the tree line, and when the hollow came into view, she stopped. She stopped completely, still as stone, reading. The anaconda had the cub in 2 full coils by then. I could see the outline of the small body compressed between the rings of muscle. The cub was no longer visible as a separate shape. N7 lowered her head. She charged. What happened in the next 40 minutes was unlike anything in the scientific literature I had spent years reading. She didn't go for the body of the snake, the way you'd expect, the way most attacks on constrictors are documented. She went straight for the head. One precise strike, her jaws closing just behind the anaconda's skull, and then she pulled backward with everything she had. The snake responded by constricting harder. The coils tightened. The cub made no sound. N7 released the head and circled, fast, low to the ground. The anaconda tracked her with its body, pivoting, reorienting its mass. For a moment, just a fraction, the coil on the cub shifted. Not enough to free him, but enough. She attacked again, head, then released, then circled. I leaned closer to the monitor. Something was happening that I didn't have a frame for. She wasn't trying to kill the anaconda. Each feint, each precise bite to the skull forced the snake to respond, to move muscle, to redistribute its coil, to track a threat on two fronts at once. And every time the anaconda had to split its attention, it spent energy it needed to hold the constriction. She did this 11 times. I counted them later, frame by frame, at 4 in the morning, with cold coffee in my hand, and tears I wasn't expecting running down my face. On the 12th pass, the anaconda made a decision. It released the cub. Not because it was beaten, not because it was dying. It released the cub because something larger and more relentless than expected had entered the equation, and the snake chose the path that cost less. The cub dropped into the mud. N7 was between the anaconda and the cub in less than a second. I expected her to take the cub and run. That would have been the rational move. That would have been survival. The anaconda was still there, still capable, still representing a threat that had just lost a meal and had nothing to show for the energy it had spent. Any animal, any smart animal, would have taken the win and retreated. Instead, she stood over the cub and she waited. For 40 more minutes, N7 stood in that clearing with her body positioned over her cub's motionless form. The rain intensified. The anaconda coiled and uncoiled less than 3 meters away, testing. N7 did not move. She did not growl or pace or make any display of aggression. She simply remained. Her body was a wall, and she had decided the wall was not going to move. The cub was breathing. I could see that from the camera, but he wasn't standing. Too exhausted, too compressed. He lay beneath her like something fragile that had been wrung out and set down. She didn't look down at him once. Her eyes never left the snake. Eventually, slowly, the way large things move when they genuinely have no enemies, the anaconda turned and slid back toward the creek, back into the water, back into the dark. Only when it was fully gone did N7 lower her head, and then she began to clean the cub. By morning, he was standing, unsteady at first, leaning into her, then finding his legs, then pressing back against her side as she continued to groom him without stopping. The second cub appeared from the hollow and lay down against her too. 3 of them, together, in the early gray light. I sat at that monitor for a long time after the sun came up. I have 11 years in field research. I've published papers on jaguar movement patterns, on solitary predator behavior, on what we call the myth of the emotionless predator. I thought I had a working model of what these animals are. N7 rearranged something that morning that I haven't been able to put back. Because instinct doesn't explain 11 calculated feints. Instinct doesn't explain the decision to stand still over a living cub for 40 minutes while a 5-meter anaconda reconsiders its options 3 meters away. Instinct doesn't explain the patience of it, the cold, quiet, strategic patience of an animal who knew exactly what she was doing and was willing to wait until the threat was completely gone before she allowed herself to stop. When I showed the footage to the team, nobody spoke for a long time. One of my colleagues, someone who had been studying big cats for 20 years, finally said, quietly,
that she didn't have a category for what she had just watched. I told her neither did I. But watching N7 lower her head and clean her cub in the early morning light, I realized that maybe that was the point. Maybe some things that happen in the dark of the Amazon aren't supposed to fit neatly into what we already know. Maybe some things are just true, and we're still learning how to see them.